Paramhansa Paribrajakacharya Asto Tarasata Shishimad A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnav Vrinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Sikoho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivas Adigaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinatha Shama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai. Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Jagannath Puri Ki Jai. Ganga Mai Ki Jai. Jamuna Mai Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna. Today we're continuing the reading of Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita Volume 2. This week Srila Prabhupada is going to start something new, as always. Always, every week, he's initiating something new in the movement. So this week he will begin the reading from Chaitanya Charitamrita. And he'll have his first recording of the happening Hare Krishna record album that was a great hit. So we're here now. Last week, Prabhupada came to the studio, the recording studio at Times Square with the devotees. When the engineers were satisfied, they cued the devotees. Cued means they gave them a message that it was okay. And Swamiji began chanting and playing his drum. Remember, he was able to get, it was a kol or mridanga, two-headed drum from India for this. The cymbals and sticks and clapping hands joined him, and the chanting went on steadily for about 10 minutes, until an engineer came out of the glass studio and stopped them. Brahmananda was clapping too loudly, creating an imbalance. The engineer went back into his studio, put on his headphones, balanced everyone, and cued them for a second take. This time it was better. So sometimes, of course, kirtan, Shravanam Kirtan is one of the most important of the 9 principles of devotional service. But Prabhupada would himself give guidelines for kirtan. And one of them was that you had to follow the leader, whoever the kirtan leader was. The mridanga had to go in order. Sometimes the mridanga will go fast to speed things up. But you have to follow the way the singer is singing. And if there's an imbalance, too much loud clapping, or sometimes too many instruments also. So Prabhupada would keep it traditional. And that meant the mridanga, the kartals, and only when there were bhajans would there be a harmonium. But for kirtan, he wouldn't have the harmonium. He said it would make it the kirtan drag. So in kirtans, he would not have harmonium, just the kartals and the mridangas when we went on Sankirtan. The first sound was the tambura, with its plucked, reverberating twang. An instant later, Swamiji began beating the drum and singing, Vandeham Shri Guru. Then the whole ensemble put out to sea. Put out to sea because we have to remember that Satsvarup Maharaj is writing this book. And before he became a devotee, his father, who was a naval officer, had him enter the Navy for 2 years. So put out to sea is a naval expression when the boat gets put out to sea. And because the boat has to be pulled out to sea, and then it can start on its own. So now, beginning with the tambura, and then Prabhupada starting the singing, then all of the other musicians joined in with their instruments. Then the whole ensemble put out to sea. The tambura, the harmonium, the clackers, the cymbals, Rupanuga's bells, Swamiji solely singing, solo singing, pushing off from their moorings. That's another naval expression. to push off from their moorings, there's a pier. A pier is where the parking area for the ships. So when they get pushed off from the pier, out into a fair weather sea of chanting. So then everyone was chanting together in fair weather of the sea. Lalita Shri Vaishna Angs Vitangs Cha. So another thing we can remember, when Srila Prabhupada moved down to the Bowery, and one of his first students was Mukunda. So Mukunda, he decided to go alone to see Prabhupada one day. He went up and he was trying to get, because the door was locked, he went out and he was throwing pennies at the window of Prabhupada's apartment. Prabhupada opened up the window, and then Prabhupada came down the 3 flights of steps to let Mukunda in. And Mukunda, he wanted to tell Prabhupada that he had a tambura because he was a musician. And he was very interested in Indian music and anything Indian. So he asked Prabhupada, he said, can I bring the tambura for the kirtans? So that tambura continued here into the sea of chanting. This is the cover of that first record album called Krishna Consciousness, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. Because in those days we didn't have anything digital, no electronics such as we have now. We had records, and those records were, you'll see on the next thing, those records were played on a record player, and it was a whole production, a whole society or art of this music to be played on records in those days. Swamiji's voice in the studio was very sweet. His boys were feeling love, not just making a record. There was a feeling of success and union, a crowning evening to all their months together. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda. After a few minutes of singing prayers alone, Swamiji paused briefly while the instruments continued pulsing, and then began the mantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. It was pure Bhaktivedanta Swami, expert, just like his cooking in the kitchen, like his lectures. The engineers liked what they heard. It would be a good take if nothing went wrong. The instruments were all right. The drum, the singing. The harmony was rough. But this was a special record, a happening. The Hare Krishna chanters were doing their thing. You can remember that when they went into the studio, we read last week, the engineers, the recording engineers, they asked the boys, what's the name of your group? So they didn't have a name. It wasn't like the Beatles or the Rolling Stones. So Hayagriva told them, we're the Hare Krishna chanters. And they were doing it right. Alan Kalman was excited. Here was an authentic sound. Maybe it would sell. Of course, he was the producer, and he had read about the devotees at Tompkins Square Park, and after reading the article, he and his wife came to Second Avenue to meet Prabhupada, and Brahmananda made an appointment for them. The next evening, they went up to see Prabhupada, and they invited Prabhupada to do this record, and Prabhupada immediately took up the offer. So here they were now. This is the back of the record album, and on the top, it has, because Allen Ginsberg in those days was a very popular beat poet, so it has a quote from him from the New York Times. And Allen Ginsberg writes, it brings a state of ecstasy. And then the full Hare Krishna mantra, and then I'll read you a little bit of what it says here. Attention, all eternal wayfarers on the shores of earth. Swami A.C. Bhaktivedanta leads his devotees in an authentic rendition of the Vedic mantra Hare Krishna, better known in India as the Maha Great Mantra. Narada Muni, a real spaceman with power to travel freely throughout the entire creation, first brought this chant to earth from the planet Goloka, located in the spiritual sky. In this way, it has been sung on the banks of the Ganges for many thousands of years. About 500 years ago, Lord Chaitanya proclaimed this chant to be the most effective means to self-realization available to man in this age of Kali, destruction. Today, Swami Bhaktivedanta delivers it to the West. This transcendental sound vibration is called Bhakti Yoga, or the Yoga of Ecstasy. It is easy and can be practiced by anyone. Simply sit down, relax, and listen. Listen carefully, and gradually you will begin to feel like singing too. Sing. As you sing, you will feel like dancing. Dance. Do the dance of ecstasy. Anyone can. There is no question of learning it. You already know it. Simply raise your arms over your head and dance. Relax, sing, dance. A new life of bliss and cosmic consciousness await you on the other side of the mirror of the mind. This life is lived in love and can most easily be reached by singing and dancing. This is Bhakti Yoga, the yoga for a new age. Try it. This record also contains 2 prayers by Swami Bhaktivedanta, sung in praise and adoration of his spiritual master, Sri Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. The prayers liken this material world to a great forest fire. So who knows which prayers those are? Samsaradava. And the spiritual master to the rain cloud that can extinguish it. Swami A.C. Bhaktivedanta was born Abhay Charan Day in Calcutta, India, in 1896. Trained at the finest Indian universities, he was a successful young businessman when in 1922 he met his spiritual master, Sri Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. Just before his departure from this mortal world in 1936, Swami Bhaktivedanta was charged with the responsibility of spreading this movement to the English-speaking world. Shortly thereafter, an English fortnightly was established and work was begun on a number of books and translations, the most ambitious of which is a proposed 60-volume translation and commentary of the Srimad Bhagavatam still in progress. So Prabhupada expected that his translation of Srimad Bhagavatam would be 60 volumes, because his first 3 volumes, he had them at a specific number of pages of 400 pages, within 400 pages. And because the first volume itself took 3, and there were 12 volumes, so he expected that his, of course you have to consider that the 10th canto itself is 90 chapters. So Prabhupada, in just the first canto, because that had to be 3 volumes, he expected it to be 60 volumes. Of course, now we print it in only 18 volumes because we have different ways of printing other than the way Prabhupada was printing. Now we're doing offset, where he was doing typeset, things like that. Finally, in 1959, he took up the life of a sannyasi, fully engaged in the duties ordered by his spiritual master. In 1965, the 70-year-old Swami sailed to the West with the message entrusted to him nearly 3 decades earlier. He now offers it to every American. Rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say, rejoice. For any additional information, write International Society for Krishna Consciousness, 1619 Broadway, New York City, room 602. That is the address of the producer, the studio. So this is called the Happening Album. And I was supposed to bring you, actually we hear it every day. This one, Hare Krishna, that's from this Happening album. And many of the original, when Prabhupada sings the Samsara prayers, all of these are from this original Happening album. So this is what a record album looks like. We have samples of these in Prabhupada's room, in his back bedroom, because this is the way music was produced in the 60s. After a few rounds of the mantra, the devotees began to feel relaxed, as though they were back in the temple, and they were able to forget about making mistakes on the record. They just chanted, and the beat steadied into a slightly faster pace. The word Hare would come sometimes with a little shout in it, but there were no emotional theatrics in the chorus, just the straight response to the Swami's melody. 10 minutes went by. The chanting went faster, louder, and faster. Swamiji doing more fancy things on the drum, until suddenly everything stopped, with the droning note of the harmonium lingering. So the devotees, they didn't realize it, but all their months of singing with Srila Prabhupada at the temple, it was like a rehearsal for this big event of the final recording. And this record album went on for years and years. To this day, we still hear it every day when we're taking prasadam. The same record album. Alan came out of the studio. "It was great, Swami, great. Would you like to just go right ahead and read the address now?" Because Prabhupada had prepared something. He wanted to speak something, not just sing. "Or are you too tired?" With polite concern, pale, befreckled Alan Kalman peered through his thick glasses at the Swami. Swamiji appeared tired, but he replied, "No, I am not tired." Then the devotee sat back in the studio to watch and listen as Prabhupada read his prepared statement. So this particular picture is the cover of the second album that Srila Prabhupada made. And that one is when you hear it less frequently. It's when Srila Prabhupada chanted practically the whole first side is the Sad Goswami Astakam. Maybe some of you have heard that. Yes, so this is just the beginning of Srila Prabhupada now making popular all over the world through these record albums. Now Prabhupada begins his address. As explained on the cover of the record album, the sympathetic devotees thought that Swamiji, despite his accent, sounded perfectly clear, reading from his script like an elocutionist. Elocutionist means one who speaks very perfectly. This transcendental vibration, by chanting of Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, is the sublime method for reviving our Krishna consciousness. The language was philosophic, and the kind of people who usually walked out of the temple as soon as the kirtans ended, before the Swami could even speak a word, would also not appreciate this speech on their record album. So the devotees already had experience that a lot of the people who came to the temple, they would just come to groove on the kirtans. And as soon as the kirtan was over, that half-hour kirtan, they would get up and leave before Swamiji even began speaking, because they weren't interested in the philosophy. But some of them, they decided to stay because they heard that after the Swami's 1-hour lecture, there was going to be another kirtan. So they would sit through the lecture to have the second kirtan. As living spiritual souls, Swamiji preached, we are all originally Krishna conscious entities, but due to our association with matter from time immemorial, our consciousness is now polluted by material atmosphere. The devotees listened submissively to the words of their spiritual master. while at the same time trying to comprehend the effect this would have on the audience. Certainly, some people would turn it off at the very mention of his spiritual nature. Swamiji continued reading, explaining that the chanting would deliver one from the sensual, the mental, and the intellectual planes, and bring one to the spiritual realm. If you like, next week we could hear this. I forgot to bring it today, but we can hear Prabhupada's, the recording. We have seen it practically, he continued, or if anyone has a phone, they can look up this record album, 1966, happening. Even a child can take part in the chanting, or even a dog can take part in it. The chanting should be heard, however, from the lips of a pure devotee of the Lord. And he continued reading on to the end. No other means, therefore, of spiritual realization is as effective in this age as chanting the Maha Mantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Alan again came rushing out of the studio. It was fine, he said. He explained that they had recorded a little echo into the speech to make it special for the listener. Now he pushed back his glasses with his finger. We've got about 10 minutes left on the side with the speech. Would you like to chant again, or is it too late? Yeah, that's it. Go on. See, it starts with the tambura. We hear this every day. Still going on. Now you can fast forward a little bit to hear the other songs. This one is sped up. You go a little forward. Even a dog can take it. Now go ahead, and you'll hear this last 10 minutes. All right, thank you very much. No, it was not too late. Oops. He would chant the prayers to his spiritual master. While his disciples lounged around the studio, watching their spiritual master and the technical activity of the engineers behind the glass, Prabhupada began singing. Again the harmonium's drone began, then the tambura and drum, but with a much smaller rhythm group than before. He sang through, without any retakes, and then ended the song and the evening with a fortissimo drumming as the hand-pumped organ notes faded. Again, Alan came out and thanked the Swami for being so patient and such a good studio musician. Prabhupada was still sitting. Now we are tired, he admitted. Suddenly, over the studio sound system came a playback of the Hare Krishna chanting, complete with echo. When Prabhupada heard the successful recording of his chanting, he became happy and stood up and began dancing, swaying back and forth, dipping slightly from the waist, his arms upraised in the style of Lord Chaitanya, dancing in ecstasy. Now this picture, see, that was spontaneous. Prabhupada just stood up and began dancing. So this picture is just a few years later, when the Rath Yatra was held at the Golden Gate Park in San Francisco. By that time, Prabhupada had quite a few disciples, and it was a huge parade with 3 gigantic carts, and tens of thousands of people followed the parade. And here, just remember how Prabhupada started. And this was his first record. Now we have Prabhupada dancing in front of the carts, and thousands of people dancing along with Srila Prabhupada. The scheduled performance was over, but now Swamiji was making the best performance of the evening from his spontaneous feelings. As he danced, his half-asleep disciples became startled and also rose to their feet and joined him, dancing in the same style. And in the recording booth behind the glass, the engineers also raised their hands and began dancing and chanting. Contagious. Now you have made your best record, Swamiji told Mr. Kalman as he left the studio for the freezing Manhattan evening. This is December. It is so cold in New York in December. We had several temples in New York, the first being 26 2nd Avenue, the second being 61 2nd Avenue, just down the road. Then they moved to Brooklyn and to Henry Street. Huge amount of devotees joined there. Then they got a skyscraper in Manhattan. And Prabhupada was so happy with that 12-story high skyscraper. Oh, he loved that building, and he wanted that building to be the main temple in New York. And when we were in that temple in New York, there's a big, huge skyscraper. And we would look out the window at the skyscraper, and it would have the temperature, the degrees. So the temperature would go down to minus 17, below freezing. It would be so freezing cold in New York City. And still the devotees would go out on Sankirtan and do all of their, such an austerity to do Sankirtan in these cold countries. But the devotees were sincere, and they persevered and made thousands upon thousands of devotees around the world that way. Swamiji got into the front seat of the Volkswagen bus, while the Hare Krishna chanters climbed into the back with their instruments, and Rupanuga drove them back home, back to the Lower East Side. So Times Square is 42nd Street, and they had to go all the way down to First Street. It's a long 40 blocks they had to drive in this, probably midnight by this time. The next morning, Prabhupada didn't get up. He was exhausted. Kirtanananda, who was personally serving him, became alarmed when the Swami said something about his heart skipping and about not being able to move. For the first time, it became apparent that he was overexerting himself. Kirtanananda thought back through the fall and summer, when the Swami had led them all on hours-long kirtans in the park, or on late evening adventures. They had come to take it for granted. But now Kirtanananda saw that there was cause to be worried for Swamiji's health. Swamiji had no appetite for lunch, although by afternoon he regained his appetite and usual activity. So this is the first time that the devotees ever saw Srila Prabhupada break his schedule or become exhausted from all that he was doing. Remember, he used to cook for the devotees. He used to lead the classes, lead the kirtans, everything, one-man show. But this late night recording, even Prabhupada's heart was affected. That same day, a letter arrived from Mukunda in San Francisco. Not long after their wedding, Mukunda and Janaki had left for the West Coast. Mukunda had told Swamiji that he wanted to go on to India to study Indian music. But after a few weeks in southern Oregon, he had ended up in San Francisco. Now he had a better idea. He wanted to rent a place and invite Swamiji to come and start his Hare Krishna movement in the Haight-Ashbury district, just as he was doing on the Lower East Side. So this is a picture of San Francisco, which was the Mecca, or we can say the Kumbh Mela of the hippies in those days. So I have here Mukunda Goswami's book, Miracle on 2nd Avenue, and I want to read from here the way Mukunda describes this exchange with Srila Prabhupada. It's chapter 11 called On the Way to India with the question mark. On the Way to India? So this is October 1966. Janaki and I finally decided to make the break from New York and head to India, because Mukunda was a musician, and he always wanted to go and learn Indian music, and particularly, he wanted to learn Indian flute playing. So at one time, not in this conversation, in another conversation, Prabhupada explained to him that the flute playing in India, it's not like the simple flute playing here not here, in America. They have flutes. They're silver flutes. They're percussion instruments, and they have these little silver knobs on top of the hole, and it's very pleasant to play. But in India, as we know, they play on bamboo flutes, right? We've seen them, all different sizes of flutes, just like Krishna has. The small ones, bigger, bigger, bigger. So Prabhupada, when he heard that Mukunda wanted to go learn flute playing, he warned him that sometimes the flute players, they vomit blood because it's such an exertion to play on the bamboo flutes. So then Mukunda had second thoughts about going to India to learn flute playing. But now they decided to make the break. They were going to break it to Prabhupada, the news. We felt that everything was pushing us in that direction. Our meeting the Swami, our initiation in marriage, my arrest, and my freedom from the threat of Vietnam. So one warm autumn afternoon, I went over to the Swami's apartment to tell him that we were going to leave. Janaki and I are going to go to India for a while, Swami. Oh, he opened his eyes wide. When will you leave? Not tomorrow, but the next day. So soon? Yes. Will you fly from here? No, we're going to head over to the West Coast, to Oregon, which is where I'm from, and then we'll go to India from there. Prabhupada nodded. We're ready for India, I said, trying to explain. We want to experience his atmosphere and spirituality. Do you know anyone in India we could see, like someone we could contact? There is a man named Chandrasekhar Sharma, he said. Is there an address or phone number? I can give you. He reached into a false leather maroon bag at the end of his sitting mat and pulled out a small book. His address is 3/51 Horsey Road. You can note down. I fumbled for a pen and wrote on the back of a small piece of paper that was in my wallet. 3/51? What is a stroke? We call it oblique here, right? Like this. He pointed to the book. I scooted over to him. Oh, you mean slash, I said. Yes, slash. Okay, and a phone number? Here it is, 416971. So this is a 6-digit number. That means that he lived in a big city. It's probably Delhi. Because by this time in the 60s, we only had 3-digit numbers here in Vrindavan. Our phone number here was 173. And we had one phone for the whole temple, 173. We kept it in the reception down here. Anyone who wanted to make a phone call had to go and use 173. So this 6-digit number, it had to be either Bombay, Delhi, or Calcutta. What city? Delhi, old Delhi. There was a long pause. I wasn't sure how to say goodbye to him. Then Mukunda says, California would be a good place for you to start a temple. I said at last. There's lots of interest in India and spirituality in that part of the country, especially in Los Angeles. There's lots of open-minded people there. Some even understand Sanskrit, like Ishvara Parama Krishna Sachidananda Vigraha Anadiradir Govinda Sarvakarana Karanam. So when Mukunda had asked Prabhupada to give Sanskrit classes, Prabhupada used that opportunity to teach his students this one sloka, the first sloka of the Brahma Samhita. And Mukunda was showing Prabhupada at this time that he had actually memorized the sloka. So he was spouting it, he was pronouncing it for Srila Prabhupada. The Swami's face lit up like a light bulb when I recited the one and only Sanskrit verse I'd memorized, the verse he'd taught us in the Saturday Sanskrit class. A huge grin appeared on his face. Oh, very good, he exclaimed. So you remember the Brahma Samhita verse? Yes, Swami. I thought I should try to memorize it. He nodded, obviously very pleased. Somehow the Sanskrit words seemed to mean more to him than the entire English conversation. Well, I guess I'll go then, I said. Hare Krishna. I bowed down on the floor before him, as I'd seen others do. I heard the Swami's voice behind me as I reached the door. Mukunda, I turned around. Just see if you can start one center on the West Coast. It would be a very great service. I smiled and gave a half nod. Okay, I mumbled. As I walked down the stairs to the Swami's courtyard, I could smell the garbage wafting on the street. That's New York for you. Okay, so then Mukunda describes his trip back to Oregon. New York is on one side of America, and Oregon is way on the other side, on the West Coast, up north near California. So it takes about 3 or 4 days to drive there. It's about 3,000 miles away, which is about 4,000 kilometers. Yes. So he got to Oregon because both he and Janaki were from Oregon. They saw their families. They went to visit Janaki's aunt, who lived in a forest. And if you remember, they had a dog. And the dog, they also went to see their friends who they had grown up with. That's Sam. And Sam had a girlfriend named Melanie. Sam became Shyamasundar, and Melanie became Malati. So Sam was a forest ranger. They have forests you can't see the end of in Oregon. Amazingly huge forests. And they had forest rangers who lived up in towers, and their job was just to look over the forest and make sure that there were no forest fires. That was why. And they would take the opportunity there, because they were all alone, they would take intoxication as well. There was nothing else to do. So they went to see their friends, and they told them about the Swami, and they told them about the last thing the Swami told them was maybe they should open a center on the West Coast. And they were really excited about that. Yeah, that sounds really great. And they were chanting with them. So their two friends, Sam and Melanie, were really excited about Hare Krishna and going to open a temple, and they wanted to get out of the forest and let's go. And meanwhile, Mukunda and Janaki were on their way to India, remember? But we're going to India, I said. I felt like you'd been repeating that sentence a lot over the past few days. Sure, I know, he said. It's just that the Swami asked you to help him. And now I'm saying Melody and I will help you. See, they wanted to make a temple. I've got lots of contacts in San Francisco. I don't think it'd be hard. The place to open a temple would be Haight-Ashbury. Now, Haight-Ashbury was the center of the hippie world. And so many of us first met the devotees at Haight-Ashbury, including myself, because anyone who had any desire for spiritual life, they would go to Haight-Ashbury. And therefore, the devotees would have Sankirtan every day at Haight-Ashbury and pick us all up and take us to the temple, and we'd become devotees. So this was Sam's idea to make a temple at Haight-Ashbury. Mukunda was on his way to India, or he kept saying it. But they had a different idea. We were down there a few months ago, and things are really taking off. Okay, we'll think about it, I said. We're heading over to Janaki's aunt's place, and we'll stay there a while before we go to India. We don't go for another couple of months, so I'll keep in touch. Okay, so then, in the meantime, Prabhupada sends them the article from the New York Times. And this article was really the crowning point of Prabhupada in New York, because the New York Times was the biggest newspaper in the whole world. So Prabhupada sent that to Mukunda. And so they offered to help us open a temple in San Francisco, I said to Janaki, as soon as the weather eased up enough to give us a chance to talk. So then it goes on, and they went then to see Jamuna, Janaki's sister, Jan. She says, why do you want to go to India? Well, because it's exotic and because it'll be like an adventure or something. Staying in the States and opening a temple for the Swami would be a different kind of adventure, she said. She was obviously losing her enthusiasm for the India plan. I silently agreed with her. I was unwilling to admit it, but Sam and Melody's enthusiasm about opening a temple had affected me too. So then they went to their aunt, Janaki's aunt's house. And then he was thinking, perhaps we should just abandon our India trip and all go to San Francisco after all, I thought. That would be simpler, and we'd be helping the Swami in his mission. So then he's at the forest in a lake, and he goes out into a boat, and he dozes off. I drifted off to sleep and dreamed I was floating in a magenta-colored outer space. I saw things growing and swerving over the surface of Earth, Jupiter, and the moon. Then I dreamed I was in the middle of a place where thousands of people my age and younger were gathering, arriving from all over the globe. This is Haight-Ashbury. Congregating in a mass street gathering complete with bands and giant banks of loudspeakers. They were smoking marijuana, which is called grass, in large pipes right out in the open, in broad daylight, with nobody trying to stop them. Loud music throbbed in my head. This is his dream. I was standing on the sidewalk of Haight Street. I was inhaling lots of pot, that's another word for intoxication, coughing and getting a contact high, getting intoxicated. People were crowding in on me. I started to suffocate. I woke with a start and sat up. So that's part one of his dream, rubbing my eyes. It was all quiet on the lake. Weird dream, I thought, and I lay back down and drifted off again. The Taj Mahal and the Ajanta caves appeared in my dream. It was mysterious, exotic, but it soon became crowded, dark, and menacing. The gurgling bubbles coming up from the lake floor got louder and louder. The bubbles amplified until they became deafening in my dream. The sound of large mallets that frightening, half-naked Indians were banging on big log drums in a tropical twilight near a beach in South India. I couldn't read their faces, couldn't understand what they were doing and thinking. I started to panic, hoping they couldn't see me. I woke again and felt the sun on my face. I floated in the small rowboat on the lake for 6 hours with nothing to do, nowhere to go, my mind in turmoil about our destination. A week later, I sent our India tickets back and got a refund. We headed for San Francisco. So this is how the second temple was going to be made. The next part 2, I'll just read a little poem here. San Francisco. If you're going to San Francisco, be sure to wear some flowers in your hair. If you're going to San Francisco, you're going to meet some gentle people there. For those who come to San Francisco, summertime will be a love-in there. In the streets of San Francisco, gentle people with flowers in their hair. So this was the hippie culture at that time. And the two different parts of America, you had New York on one side. It's a cold climate. The people are very conservative. And even when the devotees would go out on Sankirtan, we were just hearing in the Hindi class, they would get jeered at and laughed at. Sometimes people would throw rotten tomatoes at them. Sometimes people would throw water at them from above above their heads. So that's the East Coast. But the West Coast is a warm climate, and the ocean for swimming is there, and the people are a lot freer. And that was why in this hippie culture, all the people started to congregate in California where the weather was very nice. They could live for free. They could live as they liked. The rules, the people weren't conservative there. They were much more liberal. So that's why Krishna consciousness really took off when the second temple was begun in San Francisco. So now we'll read on. That same day, a letter arrived from Mukunda in San Francisco. So he had gone to San Francisco. Not long after their wedding, Mukunda and Janaki had left for the West Coast. Mukunda had told Swamiji that he wanted to go on to India to study Indian music. But after a few weeks in southern Oregon, he had ended up in San Francisco. Now he had a better idea. He wanted to rent a place and invite Swamiji to come and start his Hare Krishna movement in the Haight-Ashbury district, just as he was doing on the Lower East Side. So you see, the people are a lot freer there. The weather's nice. He said that the prospects there for Krishna consciousness were very good. On hearing this, Prabhupada began unfolding his expansive plans. They should open temples not only in San Francisco, but one by one all over the world, even in Russia and China, and print the Bhagavad Gita in different languages. And he would translate all the volumes of Srimad Bhagavatam into English and take a party of devotees back to India. So this is the first time, this was like the trigger, because Mukunda now had written to Prabhupada that we've gone to San Francisco to start this temple, and we want you to come, Prabhupada. So now Prabhupada, remember that in the morning, Prabhupada was sick, but when he got this letter in the afternoon, he began describing to the devotees what his real plans were. So this is picture here, it's a map of, this is quite a few years ago, of where all the temples are around the world, where the devotees are. And many, many places since then, because we have temples in Pakistan, the golden color is where we have temples. And the blue is where the temples are in progress, like in Mongolia and different parts of Africa. But the white is where we don't have temples. And now, even the white places, we have so many temples. For instance, the Middle East, all of the Middle East countries, they all have temples. Pakistan, we have a temple. Bangladesh, we have so many temples. In Thailand, we have so many temples. In Cambodia, we have so many temples. In South Korea, all the places that are white, we also have many temples now. Everywhere except for North Korea. The devotees who heard him were amazed. Kirtanananda, who had seen the alarming symptoms of Prabhupada's ill health, began to forget what he had thought earlier that morning. If Krishna desired, Kirtanananda thought, Swamiji could do anything, and he did. When Prabhupada came down to hold his morning class on November 19th, he carried a large red book instead of the usual brown one. But no one noticed the difference. He began, as always, softly singing prayers to his spiritual master and accompanying himself with the faint rhythm on his bongo. The neighbors were still asleep, because in the morning they had to be very careful not to wake up the neighbors. Otherwise, they would pour water onto their floor, and the water would seep down into the ceiling onto the devotees. The weather was cold, but the steam radiators kept the storefront warm. There would be no more outdoor chanting now. In Manhattan, the city opens wide in the summer and shuts tight in the winter, which for the evening classes meant no more noisy children outside the door. It was just too cold to go outside. And although the morning classes had always been quiet, even in the summer, now with winter approaching, the group became a tighter, more committed core of sincere students coming together to hear Swamiji speak. You can hear all of these lectures. They're all available on vedabase.com. You just type in 1966. There's still so many lectures. You can hear the same lectures that Prabhupada gave morning and evening. It was now 4 months since he had begun ISKCON at 26 2nd Avenue. He had held 3 separate initiations and initiated 19 devotees. Most of them had become serious, although a few remained casual visitors. Now, in these morning classes, Swamiji wanted to instruct them more about how to become devotees. He led the chanting of Hare Krishna for 20 minutes, cautioning them to respond softly so that the neighbors would not pour water through the ceiling again, although they hadn't done it lately. Prabhupada always tried to cooperate with the tenants, but occasionally someone would start a petition. That means they would write a formal objection to the devotees that they should be kicked out, which never amounted to much against the devotees. Sometimes Prabhupada would help the landlord, Mr. Chuti, by taking out other tenants' garbage or just giving him a hand. So you had the owner, who Prabhupada had met and taken the rent agreement with, and then the person who was looking after the buildings, Mr. Chuti. Mr. Chuti was a husky, bare-bellied Polish refugee who lived alone in an apartment on the first floor. Mr. Chuti respected the Swami for his age and scholarship, and Swamiji was always amiable, that means friendly, with him. Whenever Mr. Chuti came to the apartment, he would never take his shoes off, And Prabhupada would always say, that's all right, that's all right. And one time when the plumbing didn't work in Prabhupada's apartment, Prabhupada went downstairs and took a shower in Mr. Chuti's apartment. So as both elderly gentlemen, they respected each other. This is what the building looked like, the back building where Prabhupada's apartment was. But Swamiji also considered Mr. Chuti a classic example of a foolish materialist, because although he had spent his life savings to buy this building, the back building, he still had to work so hard. Swamiji said he was a fool for having spent his savings to buy such a run-down building. Because the building was in such poor condition, he had to work like an ass to keep it up. This is how the materialists work, Swamiji would say. So, in the courtyard of 22nd Avenue, the 3 windows on the left, on the 2nd floor, that means here in India you say ground floor and 1st floor, but in America they say 1st floor, 2nd floor. So those 3 windows where that grill and the ladder is, those were Prabhupada's 3 windows. Now, previously, here in our temple, the road in front of our temple was a very narrow little road. And there was nothing on either side of the road, no buildings. The college was way, way in the back, in the where it is now. But there were no shops. There was one little jopuri that sold lassi, Bihari Lal's shop, and nothing else, no other buildings. You could walk on for miles all the way to Chatikara, and it was all just forest and agricultural land. But there was one house, way far up. It's around where Rukmini Bihar turnoff is. And that house was called the Moda House. It was a 2-story building, and in the front of it, M-O-D-A house, Moda House. So every morning, Prabhupada would take his morning walk on the road. He would go up to just past where the Moda House was, and then he would turn around and walk back and come back just in time for Guru Puja, for greeting the deities. So Prabhupada, when he would walk past this Moda House, he said, not Moda, Mudha House. He said, you just see, every time we walk by here, it's always locked. Nobody lives in the house. There's just one caretaker. The house would always be locked. There would never be any activity there. He said, the man lives in Delhi. He has to work like an ass in Delhi. But he has this nice house in Vrindavan, but he can never enjoy it because he's always working like an ass in Delhi. So we call it the Mudha House. So Prabhupada, in the same way, he was saying that Mr. Chuti, he bought this building with all the apartments in it, but the building was in such poor condition, he had to work like an ass just to maintain it. Mr. Chuti, although respectful to the Swami, didn't like the devotees. Prabhupada told his disciples, treat him as if he were your father. So that's what they did. Anytime they would have to deal with Mr. Chuti, they would approach him saying, we are your sons. Well, it's after 7. Should I continue or should we stop now? Continue? Okay, we have about 4 more slides. Those disciples who lived at the storefront had risen by 6:30, bathed, and assembled downstairs by 7, while those who lived outside were arriving separately, taking off their coats and piling them on the shelf of the display window. Although women always attended the evening meetings, Jadharani was usually the only girl who came in the morning. After breakfast, she would begin painting upstairs in the Swami's front room. She used a beginner's technique of dividing the canvas into vertical and horizontal grid lines and transposing bit by bit the corresponding sections of a photograph onto the canvas. The process was painstaking and sometimes her painting was out of proportion. But Radharani was sincere, and that pleased Prabhupada. She had completed several paintings of four-armed Vishnu, a new painting of Radha and Krishna, and a painting of Lord Chaitanya and his associates. So this is how Prabhupada taught Radharani how to paint. You take a picture and you make grids, and in each one of the different grid blocks, you make a sketch of that place. So sometimes the proportions wouldn't be exactly right because you weren't painting what you saw, you were painting mechanically what was in each box. So Radharani passed that down to all of that technique down to all of the artists. We would go to learn from Radharani how to paint through this technique, because then we could take paintings and go back to our temples, and using the grid technique on a canvas, we could paint paintings and decorate the temples that way. So we're going to stop here because we'll go into a new section when Prabhupada begins these Chaitanya Charitamrita classes next week. Hare Krishna, Jai.